What is your best, and that's why I got banned kind of story? Story 1. Alright, buckle up for what might just be my best story yet. Seattle's summer vibes hit their peak during Seafair, an epic event on Lake Washington in August. It's a massive bash where boat owners come together and even the famous Blue Angels air show adds to the spectacle. So here's a twist. My two pals and I found ourselves in a bit of a jam. Our usual gang had their boats filled up, leaving us without a ride and missing out on the fun. But then, struck by a stroke of wild inspiration, we decided to rent canoes from the University of Washington and just paddle our way to Seafair's aquatic extravaganza. Now, what we didn't realize was that Seafair was a solid 9 miles away from our starting point, a pretty hefty distance for just canoes. But armed with an afternoon and a shared 24-pack, we were dead set on getting there. Our journey was no joyride. We even capsized once, narrowly escaping a soaking disaster and had to drag our stuff back to the shore. The water was relentless that day, especially with hordes of partygoers all making a beeline for the same spot. By some miracle, though, we finally reached Seafair, a tad worse for wear. Our fellow revelers couldn't resist teasing us about our canoe adventure. Even the cops joined in, throwing quips like, "Mind you're awake, haha." But their laughter couldn't dampen our spirits. We earned our place there, blisters and all. After a wild afternoon of fun, the daunting reality of paddling 9 miles back hit us. It seemed like an impossible task in our battered canoes, so in what we thought was another stroke of genius, we decided to scuttle the boat. To our dismay, the canoe refused to sink. Plan B, nudge it out to sea and let nature handle the rest. We assumed the cops would find it and return it to the rental center, maybe a small fine for us. Turns out, we missed an important detail. The canoe had my student ID on it, scanned upon rental. The cops finding it would lead to them assuming the worst, that I had drowned. Cue frantic calls to my distraught parents. In a moment of clarity, I guess, another one, I dialed my mom, calming her nerves while explaining I was perfectly fine but needed to manage some fallout. Minutes later, the inevitable call came from the police, delivering the news of her son's supposed disappearance. I never got the full details of her reaction, but I'm certain she handled it with her usual grace and poise. A week later, realizing I needed my ID for bus rides, I headed back to the Waterfront Activity Center. The staff seemed worried, mentioning that the cops hadn't encountered a UW canoe going so far offshore before. Turns out our canoe had drifted all the way to Mercer Island. I ended up paying a steep $160 fine and got barred from renting there for the rest of my college days. And despite the consequences, it became an unforgettable adventure, proof of our resilience and unyielding spirit for thrills. While we lost our canoe privileges, we gained a story that'll echo through the ages. Ultimately, it is true. Working canoes are surprisingly unsinkable. Oh wow, they totally went all out for a kind of a silly reason, yeah? Story 2. My best friends and my birthdays are just one day apart. We both go to school in Boston but have gone home for the summer. I to Michigan and he to Texas for our birthdays. He decided to fly to Michigan for a visit. I live close to the Canadian border, so we decided to go over the border and celebrate our 19th birthdays by getting a few drinks at a casino about 50 minutes from my hometown. We, of course, needed a designated driver, so we got a friend of mine who doesn't drink to accompany us. When we got closer to the border, we started seeing signs that ask, "Do you have your passport?" We had completely forgotten that the laws had been changed not more than just 2 weeks before. You now had to have your passport to get into the country. I kept mine in the glove box, and my buddy had his as he was traveling from Texas. The designated driver, however, didn't have his. In my stupid teenage mind, I figured, no worries, I've crossed through Canada about 5 times a year to travel to and from school, and my car has never been searched. Let's just stow Evan, the designated driver, in the trunk. Problem solved. As it happened, 2 teenagers cruising in a sports car and crossing the border at 11:30 p.m. raised some suspicions. They inspected the car for a good 15 minutes until they discovered Evan in the trunk. At first, I chuckled, attempting to explain to the officers that it was all just a massive misunderstanding. However, my laughter ceased abruptly when I found myself pressed against the hood of my car with a large weapon pointed at my back and an officer conducting a thorough search. After extensive questioning and 3 hours in a holding tank, no formal charges were filed. However, we received a hefty fine of $900, got deported, immediately escorted out of the country, and slapped with a 6-year ban. Who would have thought stowing a person in your car trunk was a felony? And that's the story of how I got banned from Canada. Only 3 years left. Story 3. Back in 2001, when I managed a message board, I had this folder stashed away on my domain, a sort of secret spot for more mature stuff. But trouble brewed over time. There were these sneaky lurkers who swarmed in and hot-linked my pics all over the place, guzzling up tons of bandwidth. To fight this, we devised what we nicknamed the 403 from hell. Its job? Swapping those sneaky linked pics with something we call improved content. So, what was this quote-unquote improved content? Well, we stocked a folder with the most bizarre, far-out pictures we could scan on the web. It was basically a heap of weirdness snatched from the corners of the internet. We fetched a bunch from a corner of the web called alt.binaries.tasteless. On Usenet. Then we set up a system to randomly switch out the links with these bizarre pics. Those threads filled with revealing shots and mature videos have transformed into the strangest and grossest assortment you can think of. So we wrote the code and tested it through its paces on a different domain. Next, we went the extra mile, logging into each message board that was hot-linking our stuff without permission. That's when we activated the 403 from hell on my domain and goofed around, teasing everyone on those boards for hot-linking. We did it relentlessly until the admins banned us. Looking back, it was probably one of the most hilarious trolling episodes I've ever had online. Story 4. Flashback to around 2002 when I was a mod on GameFAQs. Then one day I told everyone about my true age. I was super active on the Golden Sun boards, especially hooked on them. Sure, I dipped into other boards, but Golden Sun was my absolute favorite. The catch, my parents strictly prohibited me from using message boards, so sneaking in my GameFAQs time became a bit of a covert operation behind my mom's back. Over time, my karma shot up and somewhere down the line, someone thought it was fitting to make me a mod. Unfortunately, being a child, I was a pretty helpless mod. I didn't really understand much of what was going on, let alone the implications of what a mod was. I just thought I was a pretty active user. I didn't realize that I was one of the elite until years later. My favorite mod activity to do was to go through the recent punishments and say whether I thought that they were far too lenient, just right, too strict, or far too lenient. I didn't know what lenient meant, but I could figure that out from the context. I was a pretty smart kid, I guess. However, I misinterpreted and thought that too lenient meant that should be more lenient and vice versa. Moreover, sometimes I got too bored and didn't want to read the whole post, so I would just choose my favorite. So my sincere apologies to some users who got grossly inappropriate punishments. And one day, there was a thread where people were discussing their age, one of those "I'm 40 and still playing this, is this bad?" threads. Young me decided to post a comment too. I'm only X age, but I don't see anything wrong with adults playing video games or something along those lines. The next day, I logged on, got banned. For what it's worth, I'm a mod now on Congregate, a Flash game site, and I'm considerably less clueless because, yeah, I'm no longer a child. Oh, and I've recently come to know that I wasn't just a mod, but a meta mod, a position I apparently had to apply for. Fancy that. I can't believe the admins didn't catch that early on. If you think this was shocking, wait until you hear story number 7. What the guy did there in that story was totally madly insane. Story 5. I got banned from this burger joint called Blondie's for exposing their scam. Here's the backstory. This small burger spot in Winnipeg was renowned for its enormous burgers. 6 friends and I had decided to take on the 9-pound burger challenge. To place an order, you had to call and pay in advance due to the burger's substantial size. My friend Trev had called a week prior to order and paid $85 for the burger. When we arrived the following week, we all ordered canned drinks at $1.50 each, and a couple of us opted for the overpriced $10 milkshakes. So without considering the prepaid burger, the total for the day was $40.50, covering 7 cans of drinks and 3 milkshakes. When the first guy went to pay for his canned drink, the cashier rang it up for $18.83. Questioning the steep price for 1 canned drink, the cashier pointed out a chalkboard sign stating that groups larger than 6 were required to pay a 15% gratuity. Assuming it was just for the first person, the next guy went up and was charged $30 for his shake. As it turned out, they had intended to impose a 15% gratuity on each person based on the total bill, including the prepaid burger. Calculating 15% for 7 people compounded to 105% gratuity, exceeding the entire cost of the meal. So I stepped up next to question this practice and discuss their flawed math. The cashier got defensive, insisting she was just following protocol and demanded another $18 for my canned drink. I reiterated that charging 105% gratuity amounted to extortion and that the first two people had already overpaid. I refused to pay twice for the meal. The owner, who was also a cook, then lost his cool and said, "Let them pay whatever they want, but you're not allowed back here," pointing directly at me. So I'm banned for being able to calculate a bill properly. Anytime the story comes up, I tell people not to eat at Blondie's in Winnipeg. Story 6. A group of us went to a skin bar. We were only there for a few minutes when a friend of mine slapped a girl on the bum and was escorted out of the establishment. I felt bad for him getting kicked out and having to hang out by himself, so I decided to get kicked out myself by jumping on stage and trying to swing around the pole. Little did I know, the pole actually spins. I always thought of them as fireman poles. When the pole spun as I ran up to it and took a swing around, it threw me off guard. I ended up accidentally kicking a dancer in the face as I swung around before flying off and face planting into the crowd. The people I landed on started to retaliate, roughing me up before the bouncers managed to grab me, take me outside, and deal another round of roughing up. I found my friend afterward, and we decided to go bowling down the street until the rest of our group was ready to leave. Now this guy really left that place with a bang. A foot to the face? Ouch. I bet this story made you wish people would think twice before making silly decisions, am I right? So please do spread the good word by giving this video a like and hit that subscribe button too so you can watch more hilarious videos. It really does help out my channel. Thank you. Story 7. When I was 21, I had just gotten a job at a sports bar in Florida as a line cook. It was during a New Year's Eve party when I indulged in copious amounts of Long Island iced teas. As the countdown began and we watched the ball drop on the big screen, everyone cheered and screamed, "Happy New Year!" And that's when I noticed a hot older blonde standing next to me and impulsively decided to give her a kiss. Not being a very confident guy, I opted for a quick smack on the lips. Surprisingly, as I pulled away, she grabbed my head, pulled me back, and started kissing me even more passionately. Our kissing session felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was only about 10 to 15 seconds. And just as things were starting to heat up, one of the owners spotted me with my hand on his wife's backside, kissing her. My coworker, who also happened to be my roommate, intervened just in time, getting between him and me. Thankfully, I managed to escape without getting hurt. Now, it was never officially stated, but I'm confidently assuming I have been banned for life from entering that establishment again. I don't know where he got the guts to do that. Maybe the drinks really hit that night. Story 8. When I was in 5th grade, I was the leader of a small army of children and a huge troublemaker. One day, after a pretty deep conversation with a concerned classmate about the inexcusably short length of our recess time, I decided to stage a protest. Having spent enough time exploring my school, I knew how to shimmy up the side of the building to the roof. So I did just that. Once on top, I declared my intent to jump off the building unless they extended our recess by 10 minutes. The rest of it is kind of a blur, all of my classmates gathering down below in the class, chanting and declaring solidarity for our cause. The teacher's aides were outside, begging for me to step back from the edge. No dice, I was in charge now. I took a deep breath and jumped 15 feet into the grassy field below. I wasn't injured, and no change ever came from my valiant protest, and then I was banned from recess for the rest of elementary school. So yeah, I protested short recess time by jumping off my school and then got banned from ever having recess again. Story 9. When my dad was younger, he was drunk at the local pub and started needling the bouncer about something, just being a plain prick. The bouncer, who knew him, tried to ignore him. Then my dad, he swears it was an accident, spilled his beer all over the guy. That's when the bouncer finally attempted to drag him out. My dad found this hilarious and poorly fought his way out of the bar, smashing up a cigarette machine in the process before making a run for it. The next morning, they called to inform him that he and his firstborn child were banned from ever entering the pub during drinking hours again. And then, fast forward about 26 years later, I had just turned 19 and got to go to the local pub for drinks for the first time. The bartender took my ID and recognized my pretty recognizable last name. He asked, "Are you M's daughter, cosine X?" I confirmed. He mentioned I was allowed to drink there, but was on probation. They had my name on their list. They kept my dad's name and watched the birth announcements in the paper to get the name of his firstborn child. Story 10. So it was 2 in the morning. A friend and I were hanging out, bored and unable to sleep due to our typical insomnia. We didn't have enough money for clubs or alcohol. In fact, we had a bit less than $1.50. So we drove to Walmart to see what we could entertain ourselves with for just over $1, and we stumbled upon a kite. Hey, I hadn't flown a kite since I was a kid and neither had he, so it seemed like a great way to kill an hour or two, so we bought the kite. Unfortunately, at 2 a.m., there often isn't any wind, and that was the case on this particular night too. I, being the avid problem solver I am, pointed out that we only had needed relative wind speed and that my car had a sunroof. It turned out to be very difficult, but not impossible, to fly a kite out of the sunroof of a car. And it also turns out that you can get kicked out of a Walmart parking lot for doing so. Getting kicked out of a parking lot is hard to beat for classiness. Story 11. I once ate at a restaurant with several of my male friends, and one of my friends was hitting it off with a waitress who went to a Christian college. At the end of the meal, as we were doing the bill, we were joking with my friend that he should leave his phone number for her. He didn't go for it, but I decided to prove a little bit of a push. I reached into my wallet, grabbed a piece of paper, wrote my friend's phone number on it, and put it with the tip. We left and went to Blockbuster to pick up a movie to watch. And then while on the road, my friend got a call from the waitress. He started off all smooth, but then found out that she was absolutely irate, yelling that this is inappropriate, etc., etc. It turned out that I, for some reason, had a picture of something X-rated and wrote my friend's number on the back of it. My friend profusely apologized and thought I had pranked him. An hour or two later, my friend got a call from a cop at the police department saying that the manager had contacted them. The cop mentioned that he managed to calm everyone down and they decided not to press charges. However, we were informed that we were no longer welcome at that restaurant. To this day, I have no idea what the picture was or how I didn't notice it. I also have no idea why there was an inappropriate picture in my wallet in the first place. I felt absolutely terrible about the whole incident. One of my friends talked to her and apologized. Surprisingly, the waitress accepted the apology without any issue. It seemed like the manager overreacted and took things further than necessary. On the bright side, I did get to send a friend who was out of the country the best text message I've ever sent, which went like this. Long story short, they weren't pressing charges, but we are no longer allowed at the restaurant. Story 12. When I was 20, my cousin and I went to a club in my hometown after a CFL football game. After spending about an hour doing shots and drinking at the bar, we needed to use the washroom, which was located on the second floor. While in line for the bathroom, we noticed a bouncer come through a door marked Fire Exit Only. And without much thought, both of us decided to head out and relieve ourselves at the fire exit on the second floor. Unfortunately, it was only when a bouncer came out and grabbed us midstream that we realized we were going on the patio full of people below us. After this incident, I never tried to get back in and we were informed that we were banned for life. Story 13. When the Apple Store in the mall opened, I may or may not have used their unsecured Wi-Fi to set the homepages to things that may or may not have been videos from a certain site of dolphins engaging in various activities with people. Additionally, there were rumors that the mall may or may not have had a very tiny jail in it. Story 14. While on a study abroad program exploring different parts of a country, we, as college students typically do, indulged heavily in drinks inside our hotel room. Some guys decided to light up in the hallway since smoking wasn't allowed in the rooms. Not my thing, though. A bunch of us, pretty tipsy already, hung out near the elevator area with many puffing away. I got this crazy idea to grab a fire extinguisher and let it loose. I envisioned a thick white substance pouring out, but it turned out to be more like a burst of white powder covering everyone in the whole spot instantly. A buddy suggested I hit the hay, so I did. The next morning, the ground was blanketed in white except for some footprints. Another friend tried to deflect by saying, "Hey, it's just dust," when we were asked about it. Story 15. Not my story, but it's about a friend. So this friend of mine gets pretty wasted at the zoo and decides it's a genius idea to vault over the outer cage of the lion's den. In a split second, he whips out his dick and starts waving it aggressively at these lions, all the while shouting insults at them, apparently comparing their coolness to bears at one point, until the police show up. Predictably, he gets swiftly arrested and gets a lifelong ban from the zoo. Now here's the kicker. When the officer was inputting my friend's info into their system, they decided to give him a fake name. So in our city's police records, you'll find him listed under the pseudonym The Lion Tamer. Story 16. I used to spend a lot of time playing Guild Wars. I never quite found a group of people I really connected with, so I hopped from one guild to another. Once, a guild promoted me to officer, but eventually I chose to depart. Occasionally, an officer would unexpectedly boot everyone out before leaving themselves. Instead, before my exit, I promoted everyone else to my level. For real though, that's a pretty nice move. This guy was the ultimate guild leader, putting the team's needs above his own. Hey, if you're still here, then I'm sure other people's stupidity has given you trust issues, right? So please do stay tuned for what made you immediately not trust someone. Story 3 was mad crazy. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.